So friends, as we begin together a new church year, a new school year, an academic year, this poem by Denise Levertov called Beginners seems like a good way to start. But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. How can desire fail? We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy, only begun to envision to live as siblings with beast and flower, not as oppressors. Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. Surely it cannot drag in the silt all that is innocent. Not yet. Not yet. There's too much broken that must be mended. Too much hurt we have done to each other that cannot yet be forgiven. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. The poet Denise Levertov looks out over the brokenness of our world. She surveys the damage we've done to the earth, the harm we've caused one another, and she averts her eyes from none of it. She sees it clearly. And even still, she finds cause for hope, which is something I know we've all been searching for lately. And her hope is grounded in her belief, her faith, that we are still beginners. Us, individually, collectively, young, middle-aged, old, doesn't matter. To Levertov, we are all beginners. We have only begun to love the earth, she writes. And to Levertov's way of thinking, because we are beginners, there's still hope for us and our world. Hope that we can break bad habits and undo harmful patterns of relating to one another and to the earth. Hope that we can still learn and grow. Hope that we will one day discover our power by joining together in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding, she writes. So much is in bud. That image of the flower unfolding, that's the imagery we used earlier in our child blessing. What Levertov believes is what our faith teaches too, that at some level we human beings are, or at least can be, beginners. That we can grow. That we can change. But what do you think? Can that old dog be taught new tricks? Can we grow? Can we mend our ways? I'll tell you what, I turned 52 this week, and I've got to say I'm not feeling as much of that like beginner energy as I used to have, right? You know? If I'm honest with myself, I can see that I fall into habits that don't always serve me or the people I love or the world that I love. What can we do? We human beings are a habit-forming people. We fall easily into patterns of thinking and behaving that help us understand and organize our lives. Many of these habits go way back to when we were kids and we were trying to find our way in the world and be safe in the world. But as time passes and circumstances change, the habits that may have once served us well may no longer work for us. They can prevent us from experiencing life to the fullest, from living in right relationship with others. We get stuck in ruts that we don't want to be in. I'll bet each of us right now can identify patterns of behavior or thought in our own lives that probably don't serve us very well. Patterns of relating to a partner or our children, patterns of relating to the daily onslaught of news that we receive from the world, habitual ways of thinking about our self-worth, our career, our relationship to the sacred. Sometimes we just get stuck. And what's true for us as individuals is doubly true of the communities that we create together. Communities like the church or the university. I'll tell you a story. When I was young and new to ministry, a mentor of mine told me about an experience he had way back on his very first Sunday in his very first church. He just graduated from the divinity school, and he shipped off to a congregation way up in the far north of Maine. And on his first Sunday, he walked in, and he noticed that the entire congregation was seated over on this side of the sanctuary, all on the right of the center aisle. And he thought, well, that's strange, but whatever. And then 20 minutes later, just as he rose to preach his very first sermon, the entire congregation got up and moved to the other side of the sanctuary and sat back down again. True story. And at this point, my mentor was like, okay, now they're just hazing me. you know, new minister, fresh out of Harvard, I get it, okay. So afterwards, he asked a longtime member of the church, hey, what just happened there? Why did you all move like that? And the old Mainer explained, well, back in the day, the church was heated by a wood stove over yonder. Early in the morning, the stove had just been lit and the church was cold, so we huddled round. Then, about the time the preacher gave his sermon, the stove was hot. So we got up and moved to the other side. My friend said, okay, but you've had central heat for decades now. To which the old Mainer replied, yeah. And on that Sunday, that young man learned an important lesson about how church works. 400 years we've been here, and we can still get stuck, right? So if we are creatures of habit, can we also be the beginners that Denise Levertov believes we need to be in order to build a more just and sustainable world? Zen Buddhism brings a perspective to this predicament. Zen teaches that yes, it is possible to observe our habits of thinking and responding to the world, to see them with a fresh eye, and yes, to change. In Zen, this fresh perspective is called beginner's mind. A beginner's mind cuts through the fog of habit and routine with a sense of curiosity and wonder and openness. With patient observation, it's a mind that delights in questions more than answers. It's a humble mind, not attached to ego or outcome. Some have likened beginner's mind to the perspective of a young child who experiences the world with curiosity and wonder, rather than a sense of having it all figured out already. According to Zen, beginner's mind describes how our minds once were and how they can be again through practices like meditation. But first, we have to allow ourselves to be beginners again. And that's easier said than done. The Zen masters tell a story about a scholar and a monk. One day, a scholar paid a visit to a wise monk and revered practitioner of Zen, and the scholar asked the monk if he would guide him in the ways of wisdom and enlightenment. But rather than listening to the monk, the scholar began talking and telling the monk all that he'd learned from his extensive reading in books and study of Zen. And after the scholar had gone on and on like this for a while, the monk interrupted him and offered him a cup of tea. The scholar held out his cup, and the monk began to pour the tea. And he poured, and he poured, and the cup filled up and the tea started to fall out onto the floor, and the scholar cried, "Stop, enough! My cup is full." "So it is," said the monk, still pouring, "and so is your mind. Come back to me when your cup is empty." The great Zen teacher Shunryu Suzuki put a fine point on it, I think, when he said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." Which I understand is probably a controversial statement to make in a place like Harvard Square, right? Everyone's an expert. I'll bet we'd all, though, like to cultivate a mind that is open to many possibilities, right? Possibilities for our own lives and for our world. How do we who have lived so long and experienced so much and learned so much, how can we cultivate the mind of a beginner? I'll just say that for me, I took up birding. That's right, birding. You see, when my son Nico was about 3 or 4, he developed a curiosity for birds. Instead of reading stories at bedtime, Nico liked to listen to a little audiobook of bird songs. He'd press the play button, and after each song, he'd call out the name of the species: grackle, robin, eastern meadowlark. On our morning walks to school, he'd try to spot all the birds in our neighborhood. I caught my son's love for birds, and over the last several years, I've spent more and more time sauntering through meadows and creeping along the forest edge, looking and listening. I enjoy identifying a bird when I can, but I'm just as happy not making an identification. For now, I'm content to be a beginner, to notice the flash of color, to listen to the song. And here's the thing, my delight in birds has opened me up to a new relationship to the world as a whole. I see more, I notice more, I revel more in the beauty of the earth. I mourn more deeply the threats to our earth. I pay more attention to small and vulnerable things. I'm a beginner. How do you cultivate the mind of a beginner? What practices help you keep your mind open and curious and full of possibilities? I'll tell you, it's good if we can cultivate these habits of thought intentionally and throughout our lives, because there comes a time when we just won't have any choice in the matter. One surefire way to experience beginner's mind is when life's circumstances bring us to our knees and we simply don't have the answers anymore. Maybe we lost a job or a loved one, or because of an illness, or the gradual decline of our faculties from aging. Any of these humbling experiences can teach us that for all our learning, for all our experience, we are, in the end, and always, beginners. And that just when we thought we had it all figured out, life can throw us a curveball and force us to confront the limits of our knowing. To say, okay, I get it. I need help. Beginner's mind teaches us that if we can just stay in that uncomfortable place for a moment, that unknowing, and empty our cup, then new possibilities can emerge from even the most difficult situations that life hands us. The good news is that our beginner's mind can help us find a new path forward where we had only seen a dead end. And in closing, friends, I'll just say that I think we as a society find ourselves in such a moment right now. A moment that has brought us and our world to our collective knees. A moment when threat and crisis bear down on all sides. No doubt this moment demands of us all the expertise and ingenuity and wisdom that our experience brings. But the moment also needs something else. It needs us to be beginners, open to new insight, new wisdom, open to letting go of old habits and being willing to change. Friends, we have only begun to love the earth, only begun to imagine the fullness of life. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. Amen.